She should not have been alive. A battered German shepherd mother moved slowly through the freezing streets of Flagstaff, her ribs sharp beneath thinning fur, her eyes dulled by exhaustion and cold. A torn leash dragged behind her, soaked and frayed, and beneath her body she shielded a trembling pup like a final, desperate prayer. Neither barked. Neither cried. They simply stood in the rain, silent as abandoned things, waiting for the person who was never going to return. No one knew where she had come from. No one understood how she had managed to keep her pup alive this long. And what she was fleeing from wasn't the weather, or the wolves, or the hunger, it was the betrayal of the very people who once called her a military tool. What happened next would break a heart and mend it in the same breath. A story of devotion, sacrifice, and a mother's love that refused to die. Before we begin, comment below where you're watching from. And if you believe God sometimes wraps his angels in fur, hit subscribe, because this story isn't just about a dog, it's about redemption. The sky over Flagstaff, Arizona, had turned a deep, rumbling gray by mid-afternoon. The crisp mountain air hung heavy with the scent of wet pine and an approaching storm. Rain wasn't unusual at 7,000 feet, but this particular burst came with a violence that rattled windows in the worn homes lining Walnut Street. Sheets of cold water hammered the pavement, washing across sagging cardboard boxes, a half-broken plastic crate, a ruined mattress, objects that had become makeshift shelter for two living beings trying to endure the storm. The German shepherd mother, Nala, though only 6 years old, looked aged by hardship. Once she had carried the proud posture and glossy coat of her breed, now her fur was patchy, dull, and clinging to her thin frame. Still, her ears stood tall, unwavering, refusing to fold under the weight of the rain. Beside her pressed a gangly, 4-month-old pup, Juno. He was all oversized paws and wet fur, his tail dragging like a string behind him as he tried to burrow into the warmth of his mother's side. Nala curled her body protectively around him, her amber eyes fixed on the man standing in the doorway a few steps away. Charlie Rudd. Broad-shouldered. Balding. A gray hoodie stretched tight against his belly. The irritable landlord everyone in the neighborhood avoided. He waved a clipboard at them, shouting over the storm, "I said out. I'm not running a kennel here. And I already called animal control. You're late on rent again, I don't care if you have pups." Charlie had once loved a dog, an old Labrador named Moose, but Moose's death in an accident a decade earlier had hardened something inside him. After that, he grew cold toward animals, seeing every stray as a problem waiting to cost him money. Nala didn't understand his words, but she understood the tone. She'd heard this kind of anger in the homes she'd drifted through ever since her last handler died. With no strength left to run, she simply stood, watching him. Juno whimpered softly, pressing closer. A soaked blanket lay crumpled on the concrete. A few boxes dissolved in the rain. Someone had thrown a thin strip of tarp over the pile earlier, but the storm overwhelmed it easily. Meanwhile, just 3 blocks away, a line of marine Humvees rolled down a side road, their tires hissing over the rain-slick asphalt. They were returning from weekend disaster response training. Spirits were high inside the warm cabins, jokes shared, warmth from heat packs passed around, boots drying near the vents. In the lead vehicle sat Staff Sergeant Dallas Creed. 33. Broad-shouldered. Steady-eyed. The kind of man whose quiet presence drew trust without effort. His face was weathered, jaw square, dark stubble unshaven from the field. Once a K-9 handler in 2 overseas tours, he now trained younger handlers and dogs. Calm, exact, decisive. And sitting behind him, upright and alert in the back seat, was his partner, Jackson. A battle-tested German shepherd, nearly 90 pounds, all muscle and discipline. His steel gray and black coat carried a long pale scar down his right flank, a memory from Kandahar. Jackson rarely vocalized unless something mattered. Which was why Dallas straightened when the dog suddenly growled low in his throat. Jackson shifted, claws clicking on the floor mat, nose pushing against the rear window. His growl sharpened into a single, urgent bark. "What is it, boy?" Dallas murmured, scanning the roadside. At first he saw nothing but puddles and rooftops, until he noticed the mound of belongings in the rain. Then he saw them. 2 dogs. One large. One tiny. Both soaked. Both unmoving. Dallas leaned forward. "Reyes, pull over." Corporal Reyes, a wiry driver with restless energy and a pierced ear, slowed immediately. The other 2 Humvees in the convoy followed suit. Jackson barked again, not in warning but insistence. Staff Sergeant Lou stepped out of the second vehicle, tall and lean, eyes narrowed. "What's up?" "Someone needs help," Dallas answered simply. They approached the huddled pair slowly. Nala didn't move, didn't snarl, didn't beg. She only shielded her pup. "I know that posture," Dallas murmured. "She's protecting. Someone already failed her." Lou's jaw tightened. "Let's get them inside." Dallas crouched at a respectful distance, hands open, voice low and steady. "You're not alone anymore, girl. We've got you." Jackson stepped forward too. And then something strange happened, something Dallas hadn't seen in years. Jackson gently lowered his head and rested his chin on Nala's front paw. She froze. Then slowly, very slowly, she relaxed. By the time they lifted the mother and pup into the Humvee, Charlie Rudd had slammed his door shut, pretending none of it was his problem. The convoy turned toward the base through the pounding rain. Inside the vehicle, wrapped in a thick military blanket, mother and pup curled against each other. Jackson sat beside them, standing guard. Dallas watched them through the mirror and felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Recognition. Purpose. The convoy rolled through the gray curtain of rain wrapping around Flagstaff like a heavy, soaked blanket. In the lead Humvee, warm air pumped through the vents, fighting to dry drenched uniforms and gear. Dallas Creed sat quiet in the front passenger seat, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror where the 2 rescued shepherds lay curled in the army blanket. Nala, still trembling from cold and fear, pressed her body around Juno, who had finally stopped shaking long enough to fall into an uneasy sleep. Jackson sat beside them, posture rigid but calm, every sense pointed toward the mother and pup. What unsettled Dallas wasn't their condition. It was Jackson's behavior. Before loading them into the Humvee, the seasoned K-9 had done something Dallas had only seen once. Jackson had stepped forward, lowered his head, and pressed his chin gently on Nala's paw, a gesture he never offered lightly. Not to civilians. Not to kids. Not even to most dogs. Only once before had Dallas seen Jackson do it. Years ago, in Kandahar. After Sergeant Raymond Hollis, Jackson's handler and Dallas's friend, had been killed in an ambush. Jackson had found Hollis's torn pack, placed his chin on the bloody strap, and sat frozen for 2 hours. It was the dog's way of saying, "I remember. I know you." And now he'd done it again. Dallas forced himself back to the present as the convoy passed through the gates of Camp Tenridge, the sprawling training base tucked deep in Flagstaff's high-elevation forests. Pines hung low with rainwater, branches sagging enough to slap the Humvee roofs as the vehicles rolled down the muddy road. "Corporal Reyes," Dallas said, voice steady. "Take them to K-9 Recovery Bay 3. "Yes, Sergeant," Reyes replied immediately. Minutes later, they entered Bay 3, a long metal structure warmed by industrial heaters. The space usually held injured or recovering service dogs, but tonight only one old black Labrador lay snoring in a corner crate, Bruno, the retired therapy dog who had traded duties of detection and patrol for naps and peanut butter. Nala stood uncertain on the concrete floor, legs still unsteady. Juno clung to her, shivering from the cold and from everything he didn't understand. Private Lenny Jakes hurried over with an extra blanket and a bowl filled with warm broth. Jakes was soft-spoken, tall, freckles scattered across his neck. A foster kid turned Marine, a young man who never said much but always cared deeply. Especially about strays. "They're not eating yet," he murmured. "But they're watching. No aggression. Just, waiting." Dallas crouched to Nala's eye level. He didn't touch her. Didn't reach for her. Just mirrored her quiet stillness. After a long minute, she stepped forward and brushed her nose lightly against the toe of his boot, a small gesture, but a powerful one. Acknowledgement. Not yet trust, but the beginning of it. Jackson resumed his vigil beside her. And then, unprompted, he stepped forward and again lowered his chin to her paw. Jakes blinked. "He did that before too, didn't he?" Dallas nodded once. "Yeah. Only ever done it for one other soul." He didn't elaborate. Some things didn't need saying. Captain Maria Thornton, the base vet, arrived 20 minutes later, dripping rainwater from her soaked poncho. Early 40s. Sharp eyes. Steady hands shaped by 4 deployments. Official, efficient, but kind, especially with dogs. After a thorough exam, she snapped her gloves off and said, "They'll need warmth, hydration, and at least 2 days of rest." The mother's underweight, but stable. The pup is dehydrated, anemic, but strong enough to recover. "What's their story?" she asked. Dallas gave her the shortened version. When she finished listening, Thornton glanced at Jackson. 7-year service veteran, right? But today he's acting like he's found someone important. She watched the interaction between Jackson and Nala with thoughtful eyes. There's history here. As night settled over Camp 10 Ridge, the storm intensified, but inside Bay 3 the heaters hummed and blankets warmed. Bruno lifted his gray muzzle once, sniffed toward the newcomers, then sighed himself back to sleep. Dallas, however, couldn't rest. Back in his quarters, he opened an old, worn field notebook. Inside was a faded photo, a younger Dallas, Sergeant Hollis, and a younger, bright-eyed Jackson. Behind them stood another shepherd, smaller, ears not yet fully upright. Vega. Hollis's K-9 partner. Dallas stared between the photo and the image of Nala on his phone screen. Same frame. Same eyes. Same posture. But what cinched the knot in his chest was Jackson's reaction. That chin-on-paw gesture. The same one he'd made only once before, when mourning Hollis. This wasn't familiarity. This was recognition. By dawn, the rain had tapered into a mist. The pine trees gleamed clean and dark. Inside Bay 3, a reverent quiet hung in the air. Nala lay curled on a padded cot. Juno snored softly beside her, deep in the first peaceful sleep he'd had in days. The heaters warmed the space, but Dallas's attention stayed on the thin surgical scar running down her front right leg. He'd seen scars like that before. Too precise. Too straight. Sutured by trained military veterinary hands. Not the kind of wound a street dog survived by luck. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Lou appeared, arms folded, voice low. Still staring at her. "She's not a stray," Dallas said. "She's a soldier." Because of the scar. Because of everything. Her posture. Her discipline. The way she guarded the pup. That wasn't desperation, that was training. Lou stepped closer, squinting at her through the glass. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Dallas breathed out slowly. "Vega. Hollis's dog?" He nodded. "Last seen after the ambush in Basra. She ran off after the second blast. We thought she died." Lou frowned. "And she was pregnant then, wasn't she?" "Yeah. Hollis told me. She hid it well." A heavy silence settled over them. "You going to look into it?" Lou asked. "I already started." Dallas pulled a binder from under his arm, files on every missing or retired K-9 from the last 5 years. He flipped to the page he knew too well. Vega, 771 GSD-14. Explosive detection. Combat tracking. Hollis's shadow. Behavior note, places chin on handler's hand when offering reassurance or signaling recognition. Dallas tapped the line. Sound familiar? Lou exhaled. Jackson did that. To her. Dallas nodded. Exactly. Nala stirred then, nudging her sleeping pup before settling again. Watching her, something deep in Dallas steadied. I want confirmation, he said. If she's Vega, she deserves to be brought home. Dallas walked briskly through the admin wing of Camp Tenridge, the binder tucked securely beneath his arm. The building hummed with fluorescent lights and the soft clicking of keyboards, but the early hour kept it quiet. He stepped into the records office where Corporal Maya Higgins, short, stocky, sharp-eyed, sat hunched over a monitor. Higgins was the base's K-9 data specialist, a woman with quick fingers, quicker sarcasm, and an unshakable devotion to the dogs in her database. She looked up when Dallas stepped in. You look like you just saw a ghost, Sergeant. Maybe I did, Dallas replied, setting the binder on her desk. Higgins arched a brow. All right. What are we digging up? Cross-check this file, Dallas said, sliding the page toward her. Look for surgical records, behavior notes, anything that lines up. I need confirmation. Higgins' expression sharpened, the joking tone dropped away. Name? Vega, Dallas said quietly. That made her sit straighter. I remember her. I was still a trainee when her report came in. Lost in action after the Basra ambush. Presumed Kia, Dallas murmured. And you think she's, what? Here. I know she is, he said. I just need the system to tell me the same thing. For the next 30 minutes, Higgins typed relentlessly, running cross-references through multiple military databases. Dallas waited, pacing slowly, fingers tapping the back of a chair. He wasn't nervous. He was bracing himself. When the computer gave a soft ping, Higgins leaned back as if the chair had pushed her. Match confirmed, she said. Dallas stopped pacing. Right foreleg shrapnel removal. Performed at FOB Mortlock. Surgeon, Lieutenant Menser. Scar matches the documented surgical pattern exactly. Dallas felt an exhale leave him, slow, heavy. There's more, Higgins added, almost whispering. She printed a scanned field report written 6 weeks before the ambush. In Sergeant Hollis's own words. If anything happens to me, Vega will know who to trust. She remembers scent. She remembers heart. Dallas stared at those lines. His throat tightened. No explanation needed. Hollis had known, maybe even expected, this dog's loyalty to stretch beyond his own life. Later that afternoon, Dallas returned to Bay 3. Jackson stood at the entrance, ears alert as though guarding something sacred. When Dallas stepped inside, he saw Vega curled protectively around Juno. The pup lifted his head groggily, blinked once, then nestled deeper into his mother's chest. Vega raised her head when Dallas approached. This time, she didn't avert her gaze. She watched him, steady and unflinching, as though she'd been waiting. He knelt slowly. His voice came out soft. Vega. I'm sorry it took this long. Her ears twitched. I should have looked for you harder, he whispered. She lowered her head, inching forward until her nose brushed the underside of his hand. A small gesture, but sure. Recognition. Acceptance. Behind them, Jackson sat down with deliberate calm, his posture echoing something ceremonial, like a soldier resuming his post beside a long-lost comrade. From the hallway, a firm voice called, Creed. Dallas turned. Gunnery Sergeant Elsie Morano stepped inside, leaning slightly on her polished cane. In her mid-40s, Morano was a woman whose presence filled any room, quiet authority, strong shoulders, sharp mind. She had commanded Hollis back in Iraq. She rarely spoke of him. "What's going on?" she asked. Dallas rose. "It's her," he said. "It's Vega." Morano's expression cracked, just slightly. Her eyes flicked to Vega, then back to Dallas. "The chip?" "Confirmed. Scar. Exact match." "And Jackson recognized her?" "Immediately." Morano exhaled slowly, stepping closer to the kennel bars. Vega watched her approach with calm, steady interest. "Raymond always said she was different," Morano murmured. "Said she felt more than most dogs did." Dallas nodded. "She survived for 6 years out there. And she kept her pup alive." Morano frowned. "The pup. We didn't list any litters for her." "She was already pregnant before the ambush," Dallas answered. "Hollis kept it between us. Said she was still performing flawlessly and didn't want her pulled from duty." "No chip?" Morano asked. "None. Juno's never been registered." A strange silence followed. In the military world, every service dog was documented, tracked, and accounted for. A pup born from a combat dog without record, a ghost, was unheard of. "Juno's neither civilian nor enlisted," Morano said quietly. "He's somewhere in between." Dallas nodded. "But he deserves the same protection she does." Morano's eyes sharpened with resolve. "I'll speak to command. If she's Vega, then she's entitled to reinstatement and full review. As for the pup," she paused. "We'll figure out the proper path." She turned and limped out, cane tapping lightly on the concrete. That evening, after the dogs had rested, Dallas brought Vega and Juno outside into the fenced training yard. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground muddy but soft. Pine-scented air drifted across the yard. Juno stumbled through the grass, tripping over his own paws, chewing sticks with the earnest intensity only puppies have. Vega followed him with slow steps, her gaze sweeping the perimeter, as if mapping the space. Dallas leaned against the railing, arms folded. "It feels like we failed her," a voice said behind him. Dallas turned. Private Jakes approached, still off duty but carrying a tug toy for Juno in his vest pocket. He always seemed to show up when the dogs needed someone gentle. "We didn't fail her," Dallas said. "We just didn't know where she was." "That's what failing feels like," Jakes murmured. Juno ran toward them, slid in the mud, and collided happily with Jakes's boots. The young Marine smiled and knelt to scratch the pup's chin. "He trusts easy," Jake said. "Must come from her." Dallas nodded. "She kept him alive. Fed him. Hid him. Shielded him. That takes instincts." Jakes watched Vega. "She's got a soldier's eyes." "That's because she is one," Dallas replied. The three stood in the dusk, Juno tumbling through grass, Vega lying down in the first calm sunlight she'd felt in days, Jackson settling beneath a pine tree like a sentry. And for the first time since the rescue, Dallas felt the beginning of something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Hope. The sun climbed slowly over the ridgeline outside Camp 10 Ridge, spilling soft gold across the forest floor. Overnight, the storm had washed the world clean, leaving behind a sharp scent of pine and damp earth. It was the first warm day in over a week. Dallas Creed stood at the back of his Humvee, tightening the straps on 2 shovels, a flashlight, and a folded canvas tarp. Jackson sat at his feet, steady, quiet, as if already anticipating the mission. Beside him, Vega stood with her body angled toward the tree line, her posture alert but not tense. She had been pacing near the rear gate of the base since dawn. Every time Dallas walked by, she stared toward the woods with a focus that left little room for interpretation. She wanted to go back. And Dallas had learned long ago that a K-9's memory was rarely wrong. He climbed into the driver's seat and tapped the passenger door. Vega hopped in instantly, no command needed. Jackson followed. They headed north along a narrow, unpaved logging road that wound deep into the forest. Pine branches arched above them like the ribs of a massive cathedral, dripping the remnants of last night's storm. The land out here held forgotten things, old ranger posts, derelict cabins, rusted fences. A place where memories lingered and time didn't move unless forced. As the Humvee rumbled over the uneven terrain, Jackson occasionally glanced at Dallas, but Vega never once shifted her gaze from the winding road. She sat upright, rigid with purpose, as though each turn brought her closer to something she had carried alone for years. After nearly half an hour, Vega suddenly moved. A sharp bark. A nudge toward the left side of the road. A look that said now. Dallas slowed immediately. Beyond the trees, half hidden by overgrowth, stood a dilapidated chain-link fence. Behind it, the skeletal remains of an old storage yard sprawled, overrun by thistle, briars, and rust. A weather-beaten sign hung crookedly from one remaining bolt. Easy Store and Haul, lot number 14. Dallas parked. The gate hung unlocked, the padlock still dangling open as if abandoned in the middle of some desperate moment. The yard was a graveyard of broken furniture, caved-in cardboard boxes, shattered plastic totes, and tarps that flapped weakly like faded flags. Vega leapt from the vehicle before the engine even died. She moved through the debris with a determination that pulled Dallas forward like gravity. Jackson followed, sniffing the damp air, muscles tense with recognition of old scents. Vega bypassed the first few storage units until she reached a locker in the far corner, its metal door warped and cracked open just an inch. She barked once, sharp and commanding. Dallas gripped the door and forced it the rest of the way open. The smell hit first: mildew, old paper, rust. Inside, pieces of a collapsed life lay scattered, broken shelving, a dented table, the frame of a crib. And buried under a shredded tarp and a crushed box of military gear was a duffel bag, a faded desert camo pack with one strap missing. Vega pawed at it with growing urgency. Dallas crouched, unzipped it, and began removing what was inside. A canteen. A mess kit. Empty ammo clips. And wrapped carefully inside a towel. A cedar box. Small, dark-stained, edges rubbed from handling. There were initials carved into the lid. R.H. Raymond Hollis. Dallas carried the box outside and set it on the Humvee's tailgate. Jackson sat on one side of him. Vega on the other. Both stood still, like witnesses, like guardians. Dallas opened the lid. Inside were papers, carefully folded, Hollis's handwriting and official documents preserved despite the years. On the top lay the certificate confirming Vega's appointment as a Marine Corps K-9, her deployment history, medical notes, and evaluations, all exceptional. Beneath them was a formal document signed by Hollis, designating Vega's care and rights if anything ever happened to him. The same form all handlers filled out. Usually routine. But beneath that was something different. A wax-sealed envelope. No address. Just a line written in strong, deliberate ink. To be opened if I don't come back. Dallas broke the seal. The letter inside felt as heavy as a final breath. Dallas. If you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I don't know what happened out there, but I trust you did what you could. And I trust you found her. Vega is more than a dog. You know that. She carries every part of me I couldn't leave behind. If she survived, it's because she kept moving. Because she knew where safety lived. Take care of her. She is the soul of my service, and maybe of me too. Ray. Dallas read the letter twice, hands tightening at the corners until his knuckles whitened. Then he placed it gently back into the box. Vega stepped forward and did something that hollowed Dallas out completely. She rested her chin quietly on the back of his hand. Not coincidence. Not instinct. Recognition. This was her answer to Hollis's last order. After a long moment, Dallas nodded. Okay, he whispered. We'll take you home. He sealed the cedar box, returned the items to the duffel, and marked the storage unit for a full recovery operation. Then he loaded Jackson and Vega into the Humvee once more. On the drive back, Vega leaned her head against the window, watching the forest roll by as though she was seeing ghosts disappear into the trees. By the time they returned to Camp 10 Ridge, the sky had lost its morning gold and settled into the pale slate of an approaching storm. But Dallas didn't feel storm clouds inside him. What he carried was heavier. A legacy. A promise. A truth ready to be confronted. Back inside the K-9 Operations Center, staff gathered as Dallas carefully unpacked the cedar box onto a briefing table. Sergeant Lou joined him, scanning each document with the seasoned eye of someone trained to catch the smallest detail. "She's owed something big," Lou said. "And that pup too." Dallas nodded. "I know exactly who can help." He pulled out his phone. Lucinda Trent answered on the third ring. Lucinda Trent answered the phone on the third ring. Her voice was crisp, steady, and edged with the kind of authority that didn't need introduction. "Creed. Been a while." "Too long," Dallas said. "I need your help." A soft pause. "Tell me." "It's Vega." Another silence, longer, heavier. When she spoke again, her tone was no longer clipped, but lowered, softened at the edges. "Hollis's dog. She's alive, Lucinda. And there's more. You'll want to see it yourself." Lucinda Trent wasn't just any attorney. She was a force. A retired Marine judge advocate who had fought more battles in courtrooms than most soldiers fought overseas, and nearly all of them on behalf of forgotten kings. He sealed the cedar box, returned the items to the... At 52, she wore her years like armor, silver-streaked hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun, tailored suits that moved like her skin, and combat boots she refused to retire. A fused knee from a botched parachute landing gave her gait a slight hitch, but she walked with unbroken command. She drove from Phoenix to Camp 10 Ridge herself. No assistant. No courier. When something mattered, Lucinda delivered it in person. When Dallas met her at the gate, she shook his hand firmly. "Show me," she said, wasting no time. In the briefing room, Lucinda spread the documents across the table like a battlefield map. She read every page twice. Her eyes sharpened at the surgical notes, softened at Hollis's letter, narrowed like a blade when she reached the civilian custody claim. She tapped the name with her fingertip. "Who filed for ownership?" "Preston Milner," Dallas said. "Claimed to be a friend of Hollis's family." Lucinda's expression curdled. "That name's familiar." She pulled out her phone and began searching, her thumbs moving with the speed of someone trained to hunt truth. After a moment, her jaw tightened. "Found him. Dishonorably discharged 8 years ago for misappropriating government property. Fraud charges. Then he got certified as a K-9 handler for a private security firm." The implication hit both of them at the same time. Dallas's fists clenched. He took her as an asset. And when she wasn't useful, Lucinda said, he discarded her. Disgust gathered in her eyes, but her voice remained calm, cold calm. The kind that meant she was already planning 10 steps ahead. She placed her palm on Vega's recommission paperwork. "I'm filing an emergency injunction today." She was transferred illegally and under false pretenses. "That opens everything." Dallas nodded. "And compensation?" Her smile was razor-thin and merciless. If he collected benefits claiming she was unfit for service, and she survived 6 years protecting her pup, we can file a reverse claim for restitution. She'll get her status back. All of it. And Juno? Lucinda hesitated, but not in uncertainty. In calculation. If he was born in the field from a decorated K-9, and raised in survival conditions, the military has grounds to register him. Not as property. She looked at Dallas. As a recruit. Dallas felt a weight lift off his chest. Lucinda glanced toward the window where Vega rested outside in the yard. "She's been a soldier every day of her life," she said. "Time the system treated her like one." Word began spreading faster than any official announcement could control. It started small, a photo posted on the Marine Corps K-9 network by Gunnery Sergeant Morano. Vega sitting with Juno pressed against her, captioned. K-9 771 GSD-14, found, not forgotten. Within hours, veterans groups picked it up. A retired Marine in Georgia uploaded an old training video of Hollis and Vega, and it went viral. A K-9 handler in Texas launched an online campaign called Honor the Forgotten K-9S, naming Vega as its symbol. Then the Marine Corps' official Instagram posted a photo of Vega standing beneath a tree, Jackson beside her, Juno tumbling in the grass. The caption read, "The mother who never quit." Soon the story reached news outlets. But Lucinda made sure every conversation stayed grounded, no sensationalism, no angles, just the truth. A war dog survived years alone, pregnant during deployment, lost after her handler's death, and still protected her pup through abandonment, hunger, and betrayal. She deserved justice. She deserved her place back. When a national newspaper sent a photographer to the base, it was raining again. Vega stood beneath a pine tree, Juno bouncing in and out of puddles, Jackson on guard. The photographer captured the moment Vega lifted her head toward the gate where Dallas stood watching. The next morning's headline read, "The soldier's last order, she kept it." Inside Camp 10 Ridge, life adjusted to Vega's return. Captain Thornton performed a full medical evaluation and officially filed the request to reclassify Vega as a recovered veteran K-9 with honor status. Private Jakes expanded Juno's enclosure and began early clicker training during lunch breaks. The pup took to it with more enthusiasm than skill, but he tried. And trying mattered. Corporal Higgins mounted a brass nameplate above Vega's cot in Bay 3. Vega, 771 GSD-14. Guardian. Mother. Marine. She polished the plate twice before stepping back. A few days later, in downtown Flagstaff, the courtroom filled quickly. Beige walls, polished benches, ordinary fixtures that felt transformed by the reverence of the people who entered. Former Marines, K-9 handlers, veterans, and active personnel crowded the gallery. Dallas Creed sat near the front with Lucinda beside him. Lucinda appeared calm, but her eyes, sharp, fierce, revealed anticipation. Vega trotted in quietly, wearing a red service harness, Juno prancing clumsily at her side. Private Jakes held their leashes with the kind of pride usually reserved for medals. Judge Miriam Caldwell presided. Early 60s. Silver curls. A presence that commanded respect without effort. "Today's hearing," she announced, "is not a trial. It is a restoration." Lucinda presented every document, every piece of evidence, ending with Hollis's sealed letter. Judge Caldwell reviewed silently. Then she spoke. "This court recognizes Vega, K-9 Unit 771 GSD-14, as an active combat veteran who served honorably under the United States Marine Corps." A breath caught in the room. Her record will be fully restored. Compensation adjusted. Status reinstated. Then, the pup Juno will be registered for monitored training under Camp 10 Ridge supervision. Applause erupted. Someone shouted a "hoorah" before being shushed. When Vega stepped out onto the courthouse steps afterward, the sun caught her coat, and a small crowd cheered. Handmade signs waved. "Welcome home, Vega. K-9s never forget. Mothers are soldiers too." Vega didn't bark. She simply raised her head into the breeze, as if listening for a voice no one else could hear. That evening, Camp 10 Ridge held a ceremony unlike any the base had ever witnessed. The sun dipped behind the pines, casting the memorial garden in warm gold. The small stone courtyard, usually quiet, visited only by handlers remembering partners long gone, had been transformed. Rows of chairs filled with Marines in dress blues, veterans in worn jackets, and families holding small flags. The murmurs of the crowd blended with the soft rustle of pine needles overhead. At the center of it all stood a brand new addition to the K-9 Memorial Garden. A bronze statue, mounted on a polished obsidian base. The sculpture depicted a Marine crouched beside a German shepherd, his hand resting on her head. It captured a moment frozen in loyalty, unspoken trust between soldier and dog. Etched into the obsidian were two names. Sergeant Raymond Hollis. K-9 Vega, 771 GSD-14. Dallas Creed stood toward the back of the gathering, hands clasped behind him. He wore his formal uniform, but his expression betrayed something deeper, an ache that had finally found space to breathe. Captain Thornton stood near him. Staff Sergeant Lou beside her. Private Jakes near the front, straight-backed but blinking too often, as though hiding the emotion that came with seeing Vega honored at last. Even Bruno, the old therapy lab, had been wheeled out in a padded cart, tail thumping each time someone walked past. As the last people took their seats, Gunnery Sergeant Morano stepped onto the small platform, leaning lightly on her cane. She didn't need a microphone, her voice carried with natural command. "Tonight," she said, "we stand witness to something rare. A return. A redemption." She paused, scanning the crowd, her eyes glistening. A soldier long thought lost has come home. A few heads bowed. A few hands tightened around folded hats. Morano continued. "We honor Sergeant Hollis, a leader, a friend, a Marine who never asked for recognition. And we honor Vega, who carried out her last order with a devotion that survived war, loss, and abandonment." The bugler stepped forward. And as the first mournful notes of taps floated across the courtyard, the entire gathering fell still. The final note echoed into the quiet. Then Vega stepped forward. No command. No cue. Just purpose. She walked slowly toward the statue. Jackson followed 2 paces behind her, his gait steady, tail low in solemn respect. Juno trotted uncertainly after them until he felt the mood shift, then quieted and fell in beside his mother. Vega approached the obsidian base, stared at the engraved name, her name beside his, and lowered her head. With the grace of a soldier returning to attention, she placed her chin gently on the polished stone. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone sobbed softly. Even Morano wiped her eyes. Dallas's breath caught in his throat. He had imagined this moment, but reality was heavier, deeper, more sacred. For the first time, he saw Vega not as the frightened stray they'd rescued, but as the decorated Marine she had always been. After a long moment, Vega lifted her head and turned back toward the crowd. Jackson stepped beside her, and Juno pressed against her leg, tail tucked in quiet understanding. The ceremony shifted into a relaxed gathering in the canteen. Paper cups of coffee. Soft music. A slideshow of fallen handlers played on one wall. It should have felt heavy, but instead it felt like healing, something finally being put back where it belonged. Lucinda Trent approached Dallas near the rear exit. She didn't speak at first, hands folded behind her back, watching the room with a thoughtful expression. "You did good," she said finally. Dallas shook his head. "She did the hard part." Lucinda allowed a small smile. "They always do." Across the room, Jackson lay on a mat, finally at ease. Vega sat beside Staff Sergeant Lou, who scratched behind her ears while watching the slideshow. Juno had become the evening's chaos, hopping into laps, attempting to steal sandwich crusts, and charming every Marine in the room. Captain Thornton snapped a photo of him stealing a cookie off a corporal's plate. She didn't even bother scolding him. Later, Morano tapped her cane against a table to get everyone's attention. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady, "we return to training. But tonight?" She raised her cup. "Tonight, we remember the ones who never came home, and the ones who did, and still watched over us. The crowd echoed together. To the silent protectors. To the ones who wait. To those who never stopped serving. A soft, warm hush settled over the room. Vega rested her head against Lou's leg, eyes half closed. Juno yawned loudly and sprawled out on the floor. Jackson watched them both with the quiet acceptance of an old guardian. Dallas stood near the doorway, watching the three of them. For the first time in years, his chest didn't feel tight. The guilt he'd carried, the regrets, the what-ifs, the weight of leaving Hollis behind, didn't disappear, but it softened, transformed into something else. A lesson. A promise kept. A story that had found its ending. But the night wasn't finished yet. As Dallas stepped outside into the cool air, Vega followed him to the doorway. She didn't bark. She simply nudged his hand once, light, steady, deliberate. Not a request. Not a command. A thank you. Dallas swallowed. No, he whispered. Thank you. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out. Juno barked once in response from inside, confused but enthusiastic. Dallas chuckled. Tomorrow would bring training, new routines, new futures. But tonight? Tonight belonged to them. To loyalty that survived war. To love that outlasted loss. To a dog who never abandoned her post. The morning sun rose warm over the training yard behind Camp Tenridge, brushing the red clay with gold and chasing away the last threads of mist still clinging to the grass. Pine trees framed the horizon, their trunks damp, their needles shimmering in the breeze. It was the sort of morning that felt like a beginning, or maybe the gentle end of something long and painful. Dallas Creed stood with one boot propped on the concrete step, arms folded, half-finished coffee cooling in his hand. Before him stretched the wide-open exercise field, worn down by years of drills, paw prints, and sweat. A place built by discipline. A place that had shaped countless K-9 teams. Today, it belonged to 3 dogs. Vega moved with a quiet grace that came from muscle memory, not command. Her coat, once dull and matted, now shone again under the sun. She wove through the agility course, over hurdles, through tunnels, across balance beams, with the easy confidence of a dog who had once lived by her training. It wasn't speed she showed. It was purpose. A soldier rediscovering her post. Juno, meanwhile, was chaos wrapped in fur. He bounded after his mother, paws too big for his legs, tongue lolling, tail flapping like a flag at full mast. He didn't follow the course, he invented one. He chomped a flag rope, wrestled a sandbag, zoomed in circles, then dove into the water trough as though it were the greatest invention in the universe. Vega didn't scold him. She simply circled him once, licked his ear, then returned to the course, patient, steady, guiding. And under the shade of the observation tower lay Jackson. The old shepherd didn't run anymore, not like he once did. But his eyes tracked every movement. His ears flicked at every sound. He was watchful even in rest, choosing a vantage point that let him see Vega at all times. Old habits didn't fade, they settled. Dallas took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, exhaling slowly. There was peace here now, but it had been earned the hard way, through storms and scars and ghosts that refused to stay buried. Footsteps approached behind him. Light, measured, respectful. "Morning, Sergeant." Dallas turned. Private Karen Gable, newest addition to the K-9 division, stood beside him, holding a training journal. Barely 23, Karen had the fresh-faced look of someone who had grown up in the mountains of Colorado, auburn braid tucked beneath her cap, cheeks lightly freckled, posture straight and steady. The dogs liked her. Even Bruno, the grumpy old therapy lab who distrusted anyone under 30, allowed her to scratch behind his ears. Dallas nodded. "Morning, Private." Karen shaded her eyes as she watched Vega leap a small hurdle. "Juno's getting better." Less chaotic today. She paused. Well, slightly. He's a pup, Dallas said, smirking. Chaos comes standard. Still, Karen added, he follows her lead. She keeps him grounded. She glanced up. That bond, she built it in the field, didn't she? Dallas nodded. He was her mission long before he was ours. Karen hesitated before asking, did you really serve under Sergeant Hollis? The one from the memorial statue? Dallas didn't answer right away. He set the coffee on the railing, eyes drifting toward Vega as she paused mid-run, ears turning toward the woods, as if listening for a sound she alone could hear. I did, Dallas said quietly. He taught me what trust looked like. Without ego. Without fear. He trusted Vega with everything. Karen's voice softened. I read his record. He stayed behind during the ambush to protect a pinned unit. Yeah, Dallas murmured. He ordered us to move ahead. Vega was supposed to stay with him. But she followed him back into the fire. And when the second blast hit, Karen whispered. They disappeared together, Dallas finished. We thought they were gone. He watched as Vega guided Juno back toward the open field, nudging him gently away from a cluster of brambles he'd buried himself in. But she survived, Dallas said. Because of him. And in a way, he survived through her. Karen blinked hard and brushed her cheek quickly with the back of her hand. That's one hell of a legacy. It's more than legacy, Dallas said. It's a promise. One she never stopped keeping. Juno's excited bark carried across the yard. He bolted toward Jackson and skidded to a clumsy stop at the older dog's feet. Jackson didn't move at first. Then, with all the patience of a seasoned guardian, he leaned forward and sniffed the pup's muzzle. Juno responded by licking Jackson's nose once, then flopping down beside him as though he'd found the perfect place to rest. Vega approached them a moment later, breathing lightly from her run. She stepped beside Jackson, lowered her head, and, slowly, deliberately, licked the side of his face. No one on the observation deck spoke. Karen whispered, she trusts him. No, Dallas said quietly. She forgives him. Karen looked confused. Dallas added softly, Jackson was Hollis's second dog after Vega went missing. She must have carried the memory of that day alone. Jackson carried it differently. And now, finally, they shared it. Forgiveness in the touch of a muzzle. Healing in a moment no human command could create. Behind them, the rest of the unit prepared for afternoon drills. Jake walked by with a tug toy slung over his shoulder, tossing a playful salute. Captain Thornton appeared on the tower with her clipboard, already noting Juno's progress. Even Lucinda Trent had sent a package that morning, a brass certification plaque for Vega, freshly inscribed. Service. Survival. Soul. Dallas felt something inside him settle. Not relief. Not closure. Something deeper. A quiet release of a burden he hadn't known how to put down. For years he had carried guilt for leaving Hollis behind, for losing Vega, for not finding her sooner. But redemption didn't arrive in a courtroom, or a plaque, or a ceremony. It came in this moment. A pup learning to stand strong. A mother reclaiming her peace. An old guardian receiving forgiveness. Dallas smiled. Some promises didn't need to be spoken. Some promises were simply kept. 2 weeks later, the mountains surrounding Camp 10 Ridge glowed under a crisp morning sky. Autumn had slipped quietly into the forest, gold-tipped leaves trembling on branches, cool wind threading through the pines, the earth smelling of sap and distant rain. Dallas Creed walked the narrow trail behind the base, boots crunching softly against fallen needles. He wasn't alone. Vega padded at his left side, calm and alert, her gait measured and purposeful. Juno trotted at his right, older by days but bolder by miles, his steps confident now, though still clumsy enough to make Dallas smile. Behind them, Jackson followed like a shadow, taking his time, unbothered by the slower pace of age. The trail wound toward a quiet overlook, a place where the land opened into a sweeping view of the valley. It was a spot Dallas had visited only twice in his life, the day he enlisted with Hollis, and the day he returned from deployment without him. Now, he came here for a third reason. A wooden bench rested at the edge of the overlook, worn smooth by sun and wind. Its plaque glinted in the morning light. Sergeant Raymond Hollis. A soldier who led with heart. Dallas lowered himself onto the bench. Vega sat at his feet, her eyes traveling across the horizon. Juno attempted to climb onto the bench, failed, then curled up beneath Dallas's knees. Jackson lay behind them all, tail thumping once before settling. For a long moment, they simply breathed together, the kind of quiet only mountains understood. Dallas rested his hands in his lap. "Ray," he said softly, "I kept my word." Vega lifted her head at the sound of her former handler's name. She didn't whine or bark. She just listened, her ears turning slightly toward the voice she would never hear again. "You told me once," Dallas continued, "that some dogs carry more than orders. That they carry parts of us." He exhaled gently. "You were right." He paused, glancing down at Vega. "She carried you through the fire. Through years alone. Through everything." Vega blinked, slow and deliberate. Dallas smiled. "And we found her. We brought her home. Not just to a base. To you." The wind shifted, sweeping warm air across the overlook. Leaves rustled in collective whisper, like the forest joining the conversation. Juno squirmed upward and pressed his head into Dallas's palm. Dallas ruffled his ear, chuckling. "Yeah, kid. You're part of it too." Behind them, Jackson huffed quietly, as if offering his own approval. Dallas leaned back on the bench, letting the memories flow without fighting them. Hollis laughing during training drills. Vega racing across an open field in full harness. The way Hollis spoke to her as if she understood every word, because she did. Dallas swallowed, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small item wrapped in cloth. A worn metal dog tag. Hollis's. Dallas had found it tucked inside the cedar box, wrapped in a folded evaluation report Vega once carried through the field. How she had kept it safe all those years, no one could explain. But she had. He held the dog tag between his fingers, feeling its familiar weight. "You left her something," he murmured. "And she held on to it until we could finish the story." Dallas placed the tag gently on the bench beside the plaque. Vega stepped forward and sniffed it once, then sat down beside it, resting her head against the wood. Dallas watched her quietly. "Ray," he said softly, "she's where she belongs now." Behind them, the crunch of footsteps signaled someone approaching. Dallas didn't turn. He knew the stride. Lucinda Trent stepped into the clearing with her leather satchel slung over one shoulder. She didn't interrupt. She simply stood beside the bench and let the moment breathe before speaking. "Creed," she said gently. Command reviewed the paperwork. Dallas arched a brow. "And?" Lucinda's expression softened. "Vega has been officially granted full retirement honors. She'll remain under Marine protection for life." "And Juno?" She paused, smiling as Juno tumbled out from beneath Dallas's legs to greet her. "We'll begin pre-enlistment evaluation when he's old enough." The board approved it unanimously. Dallas felt warmth surge in his chest. Pride, relief, and something deeper, something quiet and grounded. Lucinda knelt to scratch Juno's chin. Jackson nudged her hand, demanding equal attention. She obliged, chuckling. "You two are trouble." Dallas looked out at the valley again. "Thank you," he said. Lucinda rose. "Don't thank me. Thank the dog who never stopped doing her duty." As if on cue, Vega lifted her head toward the horizon, ears pricked. Not in alarm, but in recognition, a silent greeting to a memory woven into the wind. Dallas stood and placed a hand on her back. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go home." They followed the trail back, moving together as a unit, Vega walking with steady pride, Jackson pacing beside her, Juno darting ahead only to circle back as if announcing every stick, rock, and shadow along the path. When they reached the base, the afternoon sun lit the sign above the gate. K-9 Operations, Camp Tenridge. Loyalty lives here. Dallas stopped for a moment, taking it in. This place, once a reminder of failure and ghosts, now held something new, something healed. Vega stepped through the gate first. Jackson followed, tail swaying. Juno bounded after them, barking once at a passing butterfly. Dallas walked last, hands in his pockets, heart surprisingly light. Some stories didn't end with battles. Some didn't end with funerals or folded flags. Some ended with the simple, steady truth. A soldier kept his promise. A dog found her way home. A pup inherited a legacy. And the bond that war forged endured.